Welcome to my session on the Admin Mistake Horror Show. My name is Connie Hazendonk, and over the next 20 odd minutes, I will talk you through some of the mistakes I have made. Now, before we start, let's talk about who I am. So originally, I am from the Netherlands, and I started a career as a market researcher. And after about a couple of years there, in 2003, I decided to move to the UK because I was a bit fed up with my working life in the Netherlands. Continued as a market researcher and worked a lot with different sales teams. Was looking for a new job, and in 2012, I actually became what we call an accidental admin. I was offered a job for a company with a sales team, and they introduced it as, we have this nice new tech introduced. We don't know actually really what it is, but do you think you want to try it out? And I said, yeah, sure, I have to give it a go. And on the first day, I was sitting with an American developer, and he told me all ins and outs of Salesforce. And I had never heard of Salesforce. So from day one, my mind was literally blown. So I was an admin for a couple of years. And then in 2014, I decided to become a trainer. So I'm now a full-time trainer, combining end user training and also training administrators for their certifications. And so over the years, I've learned a lot because I still do every now and then admin jobs. But especially in those first couple of years, I have to be honest, I made quite a lot of horrendous mistakes, which I'm going to share with you today in the hope that you don't make them in the future. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk to those three mistakes. Just three. I know I made many, many more. But I think these three sort of are really the top of the mistakes I made, and I think worth sharing. So explain what they are. I'll also explain you what the impact was of those mistakes and also how you can avoid them. And then at the end of the talk, I'll talk a bit about some learnings and takeaways, and hoping that you won't make these mistakes in the future. So let's dive straight into the first one. My first mistake. What was it? Well, we didn't have a sandbox. And I know that's for a lot of people these days, shock horror to hear. But when I started, I didn't have access to one. Maybe my developer had, but they never give access to one to me. So everything I did straight in live. Not just, create a new field, but also working with profiles, doing reporting and a lot of other stuff. I wish we had a sandbox, but we didn't. And so what was the impact of that? And so one of the problems that we had with it, of course, is that it gave a lot of frustration and confusion by the sales team. You can imagine they're working happily away during the day, and all of a sudden they see things change. They see fields disappear or appear, pages change, functionality change. And so they became really frustrated by the whole thing. And of course, you can't blame them for that, which then also resulted in a lack of trust. We did a lot of reporting mainly. And so definitions changed, filters changed, information that was in there either was added again or removed. And those constant changes, because we didn't filter out to whom could see it, they saw constantly the changes happening. And so they had something like, well, why should I put everything in the system? Because whatever the reporting is, it is never going to be correct, which in itself was true. A lot of reporting wasn't correct because we didn't do the filtering correctly, of definitions were wrong. But in the end, it was down on what they put in the system. So although they did things right, it was more from our end, where there were challenges to be had. And that meant also a lot of extra work. You were constantly fighting against making changes, fixing your mistakes, making sure that what you did was rectified. And so for me, it was more than just doing the sort of, I won't say easy stuff, but the fun stuff is in developing stuff and working with a team. It was far more firefighting and troubleshooting, which is just really a shame of your time. And so, of course, we know the solution for that is just have a sandbox. I don't know why we never got one. I only know years later, actually, that there was one. I think for the first couple of years, I didn't even know one existed. And so I would say this day and age, when you are somewhere, make sure you have one there and do all your stuff in there. Yeah, in a recent project I was on, all the reporting we built in the sandbox and was signed off in the sandbox, and then it went to live. Things like that are really recommended. If for whatever reason you don't have access to a sandbox, there are of course options that they can be created. So check with your company and with your development team, like, can we please have one? If that's still not possible for whatever reason, I would say maybe create some special profiles. And when you therefore start building stuff, make sure that only those profiles at the beginning see what you have done. And then after a while, if you think everything is correct, make it available for everybody. In worst case scenario, if we can't do any of those things, maybe do some mock testing in like a Trailhead org, or a Trailhead developer org, so to really test out stuff and play around in there. Just try to avoid doing anything in live, because honestly, it's not worth the hassle and the confusion and the trust issues that you can get with your team. So that was my first mistake. Not necessarily 100% my mistake, but that was there. So then one of the next mistakes I made is we overwrote user records. And I think that is probably one of the worst mistakes you can make, and everybody will talk about. And basically what we did, and I think it might sound familiar to other people. For example, Jimmy here, they worked for us, he left. And then what we literally did is, okay, Jenny joined the team, just change the name, change the email address and username and nickname, but everything else changed the same. And that, of course, is an incredibly big no. You shouldn't be doing that. But I wonder how many people have been actually told you why you shouldn't be doing that and what the impact is. So let's have a look at that and why you actually shouldn't do that. So here you have two screenshots of a record. And in this case, they have been created by one person. And what happens if you overwrite a user record is the opportunity owner name changes. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, the record gets reassigned to another person. That is what you want. But what also changes is your created by and also your last modified by. And that means that any tracking of information, you lose completely sight of that. It's fine if the owner changes, because that is probably what you want. But what you don't realize is also that things like create and modification information changes. And that means you can no longer track what somebody has done and when they have done it. Now, one of the things that can become a problem is if you look at data protection. Like, for example, I, as an admin, I was asked that one of the team, they wanted to be sure that they did their work correctly. So I had to check when they created stuff, including timestamps like you see here, like last modified. And I wanted that kind of information in reporting. Now, had we overwritten the data with a new user, we would no longer be able to track that on the previous user. And so you lose sight of that information. So that is why it's one of the main problems, is if you overwrite it. The other problem is, of course, say on year reporting, especially if you do sales reporting. If a person, comes in new in the company, say Jenny starts on the 1st of the month, and she inherits all of Jimmy's stuff, she will also inherit all his sales stuff. And that, of course, is not correct, because she hasn't worked here yet. She hasn't done any sales yet. So how can she have any information against the name previously? Yeah, so that is why you really shouldn't do this. We did it because I wasn't told that we shouldn't, but you shouldn't. And the way you should actually do things is you should create a new user record. You then need to deactivate the old one and then just transfer the required records, either through using things like data loader or the mass change options that you have in your setup area. And it's not that difficult to create a new user record. It takes you a couple of seconds, maybe a minute or so to change it. And for safety reasons, that is really something that you should be doing and you should be working for. Now, that was two of my worst mistakes. Now let's look at number 3. And that was, we did all our data uploading straight into live, because like I didn't have a sandbox. And I also did it without data cleansing. I trusted the source where my data was coming from. And I thought, yeah, that's all correct. Let's just bang it straight in our production org. I think this is probably the worst disaster I created in our org. And it's something that was incredibly difficult to rectify. And so let's go through it, why that was. So the main problem, first of all, is that we loaded enormous amount of new records in. It's about a third of the database became new records. We were mainly looking at account data. And what that created also is an enormous amount of duplicates, because I didn't do a check against existing data. I didn't do a check in the files itself. We had some records, some place appeared 4 or 5 times in the org. And so it became really difficult to figure out, what is the correct data. In addition, we also added in a lot of old data that was actually not valid anymore. The area we were in was in the hotels, restaurants, pub business. And the turnover there is relatively fast. So I was loading data that was actually like a year out of date. And so a lot of places didn't exist anymore. And so you can imagine that sales, again, was very unhappy because not only did they get a lot of crappy data, they also got an enormous amount of new data to deal with. And for them, again, it became quite a challenge in figuring out what is right, what is wrong, and how do we deal with all of this. Now, one of the additional problems we had is that we couldn't use the merge or deduping tools. And the reason for that is if you think about, say, hotels or restaurants, or even pubs, in any city, for example, in the UK, the number of, say, Red Lions or White Hart pubs within one city is more often more than one. And most likely you also have more than one in the same street. Another famous example, say a Starbucks, you might have 4 or 5 in one street. Now, you can't use a merging or deduping tool for that because they look at the granularity that goes, for example, like your postcode and maybe your street name, and you can maybe do one other field. And we need to go really as granular as a combination of postcode, street, house number, and then also the name, and then sometimes 2 or 3 other items. And so we couldn't use things like merging because we might get 5 answers, but we only wanted to use 2. And so we had to check every single record by hand, which was a gigantic task. What we did for that is to go through it. We hired an intern for several months to help out. They were full-time. I was doing this part-time to go through these enormous amount of records and try to figure out what is right, what is wrong, what should we keep, what should we not keep, and could we use things like the internet to match information. So we're literally looking like, this is my street information. Can I find it on Google Maps? Can I use a street view to actually see, does it look like a correct place? So as you can imagine, that was not a lot of fun. And so what we did in the end is we said to the sales team, you decide which records are your real records. We made those records like our normal customers, and then everything else we put in prospect. And we said, over time, we will start clearing that. And that just became for the sales team, when you go to an area, check if there's any prospect information, check if it's a prospect or if it's something that is not valid for us, and then mark it as invalid, and we will clean those out in the system in due course. Unfortunately, that just took an awful lot of time. And I think we by the time I left, we still hadn't sorted it. And so there are ways you can around it. So of course, check your file first, don't do this. But there's another way that somebody explained to me a while ago, one of the Salesforce gurus I was talking with, and they actually had this as a solution. And I thought that was fantastic. And I'm always been sharing that with my admins that I train. And I also want to share it with you. And that is when you upload files, what you do is, say you upload accounts. On the account object, create a unique field that is called, for example, track ID field. And then in your file, have also that field represented and give it all the same records, the same ID number. And that represents your upload file. So for example, I'm uploading something on March 2021, and it's going to be, I don't know, hotels. That's my file name. And so my unique ID will be hotels 2021 March, something like that. And that means when I upload this data, it will have this unique field tracker with it. And so if there is questions from anybody about where is the data coming from, or it's not good data, I can actually run reporting on, okay, what is my source? Where's this data coming from? And do I need to do something with it? And that then also gives you the info and the option to mask delete your data, because you can then use data loader to mask delete information if you need to, or mask cleanse it. I wish I had known about this when I started, because that would have probably solved all our options in one go. Unfortunately, as usual with these kind of things, you hear them many, many years later, and you'll feel like, oh, I wish I heard it at the beginning. But hopefully by showing them to you, hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea about how you can avoid these problems. Now, those were my 3 mistakes, worst mistakes that I ever made. And of course, I made many more smaller ones. And how can you actually avoid this in the future? And what are sort of the learnings from today? Well, one of the main things is, I think, is using Trailhead. You know, when I started in 2014, long time ago, 2012 even, you know, we didn't have Trailhead. It was pre-Trailhead time, also pre-community time. Yeah, there was some of it was around, but the majority wasn't. And so I would really recommend you go into Trailhead, find what you're doing. If you can't go around it or you can't find it in the end, use the community. And so either community groups where you can post questions, or visit groups. You know, there's in your region an enormous amount of groups, and go there and talk with people and find people that know about these things. You know, we're all happy in sharing what we have learned and how we can help you avoiding making mistakes. And then finally, I would say, if you really want to join the mentorship program, you know, sign up for it and look for a mentor, and they, you know, you can use them to discuss the problems you have, the challenges you have, you know, pick their brains on, I need to do something. How can I avoid making the mistakes that potentially other people have made, and also learn from them. Like I said, I wish I had all of this available when I started. I didn't. So hence, I'm a big advocate of all these things, and make sure that people start to use these things in their life. So that is my talk for today. I want to say to all of you, thank you very much. And a special thank to our sponsors. Without them, this will all not be possible. It's fantastic that we can do this and have these sessions. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something from it. I'll be around today, and you can also find me on Twitter if you have any questions. And with that, I would say thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the day.